Sociocultural psychology. Historical origins. Sociocultural psychology is the study of the influence of society on human behavior. This type of psychology began in the 1900s. Kurt Lewin and Lee Vygotsky were founders. World War II psychologists studied propaganda and society during the war, and many key studies were conducted during the war, which led to the development in the field. A psychologist would use sociocultural psychology when dealing with society and how it impacts people. They would use it to explain why a person is acting a certain way based on the influences around them. The approach and its goal. The sociocultural approach tries to show us how society influences the way we behave. The goal is to explain and understand how society affects human behavior and cognitive thinking. Vocabulary. Objective culture, the surface of culture that is visible characteristics. Subjective culture, the intangible part of culture. Cultural norms, the standard by which we live by. They are the shared expectations and rules that guide people in a specific social group. Subcultural norms, the values and norms distinct from the majority that are held by a group within a society. Individualism, a social theory in favor of freedom of action for individuals over collectivism or state control. Collectivism, the practice of giving a group priority over each individual within it. Phonetics, the study and classification of speech sound specific at a certain group. Phonemics, the study of distinct units of sound in a language or culture. Vocal psychology, focused on the idea of a collective mind. It emphasized the notion that personality develops because of cultural and community influences. Research questions. How are the actions and opinions of people affected by the beliefs of those around them? Important psychologists. Kenneth Clark studied racism and segregation. Kurt Lewin, the founder of sociocultural psychology. Leonard Dube studied propaganda and communications within sociocultural psychology. Gordon Allport focused on the study of a personality. William McDougall wrote the first notable book in English about social psychology on emotion and sentiment, morality, character, and religion in 1908. Stanley Milgram was an American social psychologist, the founder of the Milgram experiment, and a professor at Yale. In 1974, he published a book, Authority to Obedience. The Milgram experiment. Question: will people follow orders from an authority figure even if it means hurting someone else? The process. Volunteers were teachers and actors were students. An experimenter instructed the volunteers to shock the students every time they got a question wrong, increasing the voltage each time. As the voltage increased, the volunteers did not want to shock the students, but the experimenter continued to urge them on. Results. 65% of volunteers were shocked the students to the highest voltage, which was 450 volts. Every volunteer went to 300 volts. The conclusion. The majority of the time, people will obey authority figures even to the extent of hurting others. Other important experiments. The smoky room experiment. Volunteers were placed in a room either by themselves, in a group of 3, or with 2 actors. The room began to fill with smoke to see if anyone would report it. When by themselves, 75% reported it. When in groups of 3, 38% reported it. And with 2 actors, 10% reported it. This experiment showed that if others are not reacting to the situation, people tend not to react either. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Volunteers were assigned the roles of prisoners and guards in a prison simulation. The guards were told to watch the prisoners and make sure everything was under control. The guards began to embody their character by setting rules, and the prisoners began to tell stories. As the days went on, the volunteers began to get more and more into their characters and included punishments and rebellions. People began to take the experiment too seriously, so it had to end early because it was not safe for the volunteers anymore. This experiment showed that people have stereotypical views of certain jobs, such as a prison guard, and will conform to how they believe those people should behave if given the chance.